Hello friends, it's Chari. Today I have a really fun card that combines a fun stitching design with some die cuts to create a little scene. So I designed this little pattern for the embroidery hoop. This is Small World. It is available on the lawnfawn website. And I've cut my embroidery hoop from some fog cardstock, and I'm just using this little tool from Spellbinders to pop out all those little holes in my die. It's also really great to pop them out of the paper as well. So I do have all of my floss pulled for this design. This one only has 3 colors. I am going to start with the green. It was a lot easier to stitch all that green around, and then all I had to do with that teal blue color was fill in between my green stitches. This particular design is all over. I stitch every square with this one. You could also stitch this on a piece of mermaid cardstock if you wanted, and that could be the ocean. I just did not want a blue halo or hoop around my globe. I wanted it to all be contained in the stitching. So I like to start going from the top right corner to the bottom left. I go that one diagonal all in one direction, and then I head back the other way and complete my X's. And you can see I'm trimming off the tail. I caught that tail underneath my stitches, and I just want to trim off that excess so that I don't accidentally catch it and pull it through the holes as I do my stitching. Now I'm moving on to the next row, and as you saw, I went all the way in one direction from the right to the left, and then I went left to right. You could do it in any direction you want. This is just how I do my stitches. Now I'm going to move on to those land masses on the left side over there. And what I did was I just worked my way down the left side, and then I cut off my string and started a new one and did the right side of the globe. So I finished all of my green stitches there. And now I'm ready to stitch my ocean. So this one took a little bit longer because it's a lot of stitches, but I did not even really have to look at my chart too much because all I'm doing is filling in all the squares that I did not stitch with the green. And for this one, I actually started in the center because I just wanted to start with those really long lines first, and then I went back and filled in up at the top. So I'm just going to skip ahead. I have filled in all of those aqua blue squares, and I'm just finishing off with my last few X's here at the top. And then I will just take my thread and thread it underneath some of those stitches on the back to hold it in place. Now for the back stitching on this one, I'm using 3 strands of floss. So I took my floss and split it in half. So I have 3 strands, which is nice because I can use the other 3 strands to finish off the back stitching. I always pick how many strands I want depending on how chunky I want my lines to be. And for this particular design, I think you could leave off the back stitching if you didn't want to do it, but I do feel like it defines the edges of the continents a little bit more. For some of these back stitches, there'll be long stitches like that one right there went across 2. I like to do that with these and make really long lines if possible. So it's kind of like connecting the dots when you stitch like this. So I'm going to skip ahead, and you'll see that as I do this back stitching, this globe really kind of comes to life. So you can see I have all those continents outlined there. Of course, this is very abstract because I'm working with squares and a very small canvas, but I think that I did a pretty good job getting the idea across. So I will just tie off my thread on the back by putting it under some of the stitches already there and then trimming off the tail. And now my globe is finished. So now to move on to the rest of the card. I have a panel that's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. This is cut from some fog cardstock, just like the embroidery hoop. And I'm going to do some stenciling with the brick stencil. So I'm just holding this in place on my glass mat with a little bit of removable adhesive. Then I'm actually going to tape my stencil down. I can use magnets on this glass mat because it's magnetic, but I'm going to do this brick stencil all over, and I just didn't want to have to move my magnets around. For the ink on this one, I am using Distress ink in the color Lost Shadow because it's a very pale gray. And I wanted this background to be a little more subtle. I didn't want it to be too stark in contrast with the inking and the colors. So I'm just going very light-handed at the top. You actually can't tell too much how much ink is on there. You can see it a little bit. But I'm being very light-handed to go all over with this brick stencil to create a brick wall as my background for my little scene with my globe and my books. I am going at the top a little bit more to kind of darken up the top and the top corners to give it sort of a vignette look. And I pulled my stencil up just to see how far and what it was looking like. I didn't go all the way to the bottom, I went really close. I am going to put a piece of cardstock at the bottom that will be my desktop for my books to set on. And I don't want this brick wall to be completely perfect, so I'm using some black watercolor paint just to add a few little black splatters around on that background. I'll set that aside to dry, and now I'm moving on to my die cut pieces. So I did die cut the hoop from some narwhal cardstock. I'm using the book collection dies. I'm also using some of the art supplies like the jar and the paintbrushes, and then I have the little pin. This is from the little letter die set. I just happen to have it on this magnetic card. And then I'm using the very top of the build-a-gumball machine. This will be the base of my globe. So I've die cut all of my pieces here in this little tray. I did use the textured cardstock packs for my colored pieces. And I did cut the pin from the embroidery hoop as well. This is cut from some silver metallic cardstock. This is going to be my axis for my globe. So I am going to start by constructing my globe. I did cut a 2.5-inch circle out of that same fog cardstock. I like to add a solid piece on the back of my stitching so that I have a nice solid place to glue my pieces to. This is optional. I don't know that you would have to do this, but this gave me a nice flat surface to glue to. And I like to hold my hand on the front like this and kind of form that piece to the background because those stitches are kind of fat, so it'll kind of curve it a little bit. Now I flipped it over and I'm taking those two little pins cut from the silver metallic cardstock and I'm putting one at the top, which is really easy to see because of that little notch. And then I'm putting one at the bottom and I'm making sure that the head of the pin is kind of lined up to where just that is peeking out the top and the bottom. So now I have my axis in place for my globe. Now for the frame around the globe, I'm going to trim it in half. So I'm trimming it to the left side of the top piece here. And I'm just going to hold this in place and mark with a pencil about where I need to trim it on the other side to create a sort of half circle for my globe to set in. And I can just glue this directly to that side of the hoop. So now I have the main part of my globe and I need to make the base, which is where the gumball machine comes in. So I cut the top of the gumball machine, which is this piece here. And the reason I did that is so I had a solid piece to glue the pieces to. And I actually only used the larger of the two pieces because these are all cut from the same colored cardstock. So I really only needed to layer this bottom one on there to give it some dimension. I am going to pull out my warm gray markers and color this die cut a little bit to create the look of a curved base to my globe. I think that this just kind of made it stand out a little bit more. Now I wanted this to be all put together, so what I'm actually going to do is this is a reject pin that I cut. I initially cut it from some narwhal cardstock and decided to go with the metallic silver. So I'm just cutting a little piece of it off so I have like a little rectangular piece there. And I'm going to flip the base over, add a little bit of liquid glue on the back, and then take this little rectangular piece and glue it right there in the center. Then I'm going to flip it back over, so I kind of have this stand sticking up, and I will put a little bit of liquid glue on the front of this rectangular piece, and now I can just glue it to the back of my globe. And then this will be all one piece that I can just pick up and put onto my card. Now for the desk that all my books are going to sit on, I'm using a piece of woodgrain cardstock in that dark brown color. I'm cutting this to 3/4 of an inch wide, and then of course 4¼ inches long to go across the bottom of my card. This will just be the base or the desktop for all my books and my globe and my other little goodies to sit on. I also need to add this whole background piece to a card base, so I will go ahead and do that as well. And now I'm ready to assemble all of my books. So I used pieces or colors, I should say, from a few different textured cardstock packs for my books. So I used the pink pack, the yellow pack, the aqua pack, and the blue pack. And the pages of my book are just cut from some vanilla malt cardstock. And I'm layering these books together so that we're filling in those little holes that are cut in the books. So this blue book will have those little aqua details showing through those holes. The red book is going to have that lighter pink color. And then the yellow book will have the lighter yellow color showing through those openings. I also need to assemble my pin, my fountain pen. This is from the little letter die set. I cut this from some silver metallic cardstock, and then I cut the two pieces that are the barrel of the pin from the same cardstock that matches that reddish pink book. Now I also have two paintbrushes from the art supplies die set. One is cut from an aqua color and the other is cut from yellow. I'm using kraft paper for the bristles of the brush and that same silver metallic cardstock for the little metal detail. Now to add a little more interest to these brushes, I am going to grab a brown Copic marker and I'm just going to add little brush strokes like the bristles, and I think that this added some nice interest to these paintbrushes. I also have the little jar from the art supplies die set, which is where my paintbrushes are going to go. I cut this from some vellum so that you can see the paintbrushes through the vellum, but I did feel like once I kind of glued these in here and started looking at it, that vellum kind of disappeared a little bit too much on my background. So what I did to kind of help this jar stand out a little bit more is I flipped it over to the back side. I have a very pale blue Copic marker here, and I'm just kind of adding some shading around the sides and the bottom. You can see I put a piece of white cardstock so you can see that a little better. Now this is on the back side of the vellum, so when I flip it over, it's not going to be quite as obvious, and it's going to be a little less obvious on that gray cardstock than it is on the white cardstock that I'm working on right now. So I thought I would add a little more definition to the sides and the bottom with a gray Copic marker. When you're working with vellum, you do have to pick a slightly darker shade than you might want because coloring on the vellum is a lot lighter than it would be coloring on an absorbent paper. So that worked a bit better, and I have the shape of the jar, and I think it stands out on the background a little bit more. I've placed all my items onto my card base where I want them to go, and now I'm just going to stick them all down. I'm using foam squares for my books. This gives them some nice dimension off that background. And then for the globe, I'm actually just going to glue this directly to the background. I'm not going to pop it up. This kind of makes it look like it's sitting a little further back and those books are sticking out. For my jar of paintbrushes, because I don't want to see that adhesive, I'm putting the adhesive on the back of the paintbrushes and on the side of the jar that will be hidden behind the books. And I did put a little along the bottom, but that's going to be hidden by this pin here. And I used my foam strips to put along the back of the pin, so it's popped up too. Now I want my sentiment to curve around my globe. I'm using the sentiment from the set that says sending smiles your way, and I want it to curve around the globe so that it's kind of incorporated into the scene. That's a little hard to do, but I'm going to show you a really fun trick. So I am taking the die for the embroidery hoop and I'm laying it right where my circle is, closing my MISTI, and then I have a magnet. And I'm going to put that magnet right onto that die, and it's going to hold that die in place through the door of my MISTI. Now I can open up my MISTI, and I have the perfect guide to see exactly where to put my sentiment. And it's even better because it's a die, so it has a nice edge, and I can kind of bump my sentiment right up against the curve of the die. So I'm just putting my sentiment in place. I did test it a couple times. I did sort of shift it around so it was closer to the top of my circle. And I always want to do a test stamp before I stamp it right onto my project. Make sure it's looking really good, and it looks fine. I'm looking at the placement one more time, and now I'm going to stamp the sentiment right along the edge of the globe. Now, if you're really nervous about this, I did actually check after the fact, and the curved sentiment banner in the Swivel Surprise die set would fit really nicely in this position as well. I did forget that I had cut this little bookmark from the book collection set, so I'm going to add that coming out of the book that's on its side, and so I can tuck the end of it right in the slit of the pages. All about those little extra details, and I actually wanted to add a little more detail to my globe by adding a little heart right around here where North Carolina is. So I have this little tiny heart. You can see all those hearts. I just keep them when I have extras, but this was cut with the smallest heart from the Hearts and Stars skinny tag die. It's cut from some Guava cardstock, and I'm just adding a tiny dot of glue to my stitching and adding my little heart. This is the perfect place for a little bit of glitter, and otherwise I'm not going to put any other glitter on this card. And then here is that finished card. I am so pleased with how it turned out. I love that stitch globe, and it goes perfectly with the book collection books. Here is another look at that final card. I think this would be a great congratulations card as well. And if you're not into stitching, you could always just color a globe on a circle and get the same effect. Thank you so much for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye!